This is where execution gets its shape, and PMBOK 8 draws a clear line from the past. PMBOK 8 uses 7 integrated performance domains because work doesn't happen in isolation. Each domain gives you an execution architecture, key concepts to orient you, processes you can draw from without being forced to follow, tailoring considerations so context stays in control, interactions that acknowledge nothing works alone, and outcome checks to keep value visible. Performance domains aren't phases. You don't move through them in order. They're areas of focus that stay active together. This is also where PMI makes its intent unmistakable. There are 40 processes, but none of them are mandatory. Not because they're unimportant, but because blind compliance was never the goal. These processes are reference tools, not requirements. Not proof that you did it right. They're meant to be used with judgment. You can combine them when separation adds no value. You can simplify them when complexity doesn't demand rigor. And you can omit them entirely if they don't serve the work that's in front of you. What matters is why you're using them. Their value depends on the reality you're in, how complex the work actually is, how much risk you're carrying, the delivery approach you're working within, and the maturity of the organization that you're operating inside. This is where the guide steps in. It doesn't tell you what to do. It shows you options, models, methods, and artifacts you might use to support each domain. The domains define where your attention belongs. The guide gives you ways to support it. PMBOK 8 isn't trying to standardize behavior. It's trying to standardize thinking. Use what helps you decide better and let go of what doesn't. Here's the simplest way to hold it in your head. PMBOK 8 doesn't measure you by how many processes you use. It measures you by how well you decide when it actually matters. The first domain sets the tone for everything else. This is where projects either stay aligned or drift. Governance isn't about control, it's about clarity. Who has the right to decide when trade-offs show up? Where issues go if they can't be resolved at the team level? What gets measured so progress is visible and not assumed? And how ethical conduct is maintained when pressure builds. Without decision rights, everything stalls. Without escalation paths, risks fester. Without meaningful metrics, status becomes storytelling. And without ethics, short-term wins can create long-term damage. The processes here aren't heavy, they're foundational. You establish governance structures so decisions don't depend on personalities. You monitor alignment so strategy and execution don't separate. And you enable transparency so problems surface early when they're still manageable. This is also where the guide steps in. It supports the domain with governance models that clarify authority and accountability, decision frameworks that help navigate tough calls, oversight and escalation mechanisms that keep issues from going underground, methods for monitoring governance health, and artifacts that makes transparency and reporting real. PMBOK 8 treats governance as a support system. When it's working, the project moves faster. When it's missing, everything else feels harder than it should. This is what governance looks like when it's done deliberately. Authorizing the project isn't just paperwork. It's the moment the organization says, yes, this matters enough to begin. Without that clarity, everything that follows feels fragile. The project charter sets the frame, why this exists, and what success looks like. And just as important, what's out of bounds. Engaging sponsors isn't just about status updates. It's about securing real ownership. Someone with the authority to decide, protect the work, and remove obstacles when progress slows. Defining the governance structure makes decisions survivable. Who decides what? Where issues escalate? What controls exist to prevent drift without choking momentum? Monitoring governance effectiveness keeps it honest. If governance starts slowing value instead of enabling it, it needs to change. Ethical conduct isn't optional when pressure shows up. Transparency and integrity are what keep short-term wins from creating lasting damage. And alignment with strategy is never a one-time check. As priorities shift, the question has to be asked again. Does this still deserve the organization's time and resources? PMBOK 8 treats governance as living. When it's working, decisions move faster. And when it isn't, no amount of execution can compensate. The scope performance domain is where value either becomes clear or gets diluted. This domain isn't about listing everything you could do. It's about deciding what actually matters. Requirements are signals. They tell you what someone needs, not automatically what to build. Deliverables are commitments. They're what you agree will exist at the end and not what you hope will. And the distinction between project scope and product scope matters more than you think. Product scope is about features and capabilities. Project scope is about the work required to deliver them. Mix those up and confusion shows up fast. The processes here exist to protect focus. You define scope so effort has direction. You validate scope so what's delivered matches what was intended. And you control changes so every adjustment is intentional and not reactive. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers ways to represent requirements and outcomes clearly. Models that help decompose scope without losing intent. Methods for eliciting and validating requirements. And artifacts that communicate scope so that everybody stays aligned. PMBOK 8 isn't trying to stop change. It's making sure that change doesn't erase the value that you started the project to deliver. This is where value either stays sharp or slowly starts to blur. Collecting requirements isn't about capturing every request. It's about listening for what the stakeholders actually need and not what they ask for first. Defining scope is where intent becomes commitment. You translate those needs into clear outcomes and deliverables so effort has a target and not just momentum. Decomposing the work makes the work survivable. Whether it's a work breakdown structure or a backlog, this is how complexity becomes manageable. Validating scope is a conversation and not a sign-off. It's where you confirm what was delivered matches what was meant before assumptions harden into disappointment. Controlling scope doesn't mean resisting change. It means making change visible. Every adjustment has a cost, and this is where you decide if it's worth paying. And refining scope through learning is what keeps adaptive work honest. As understanding improves, scope should evolve with it. Freezing learning in the name of certainty is how value gets lost. PMBOK 8 treats scope as dynamic. If it isn't actively being shaped, it's being shaped for you, and usually by accident. The schedule performance domain reframes how time is treated. Schedule in PMBOK 8 isn't about dates on a calendar. It's about how time is used to deliver value. Sequencing is simply order. What has to happen before something else is allowed to begin? Cadence is rhythm. How often progress is visible. How often learning shows up. And then there's the tension most projects live in. Flow versus deadlines. Deadlines create urgency. Flow creates sustainability. Good schedule thinking knows when to lean on each. The processes here are light by design. You plan the schedule to create shared expectations. You estimate durations to reduce surprises and not to predict perfectly. And you control progress so that reality shows up early while you still have options. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers time-based planning and flow models, methods for sequencing and forecasting, scheduling and flow models that fit different contexts, estimation and tracking methods that reflect uncertainty, and artifacts that visualize progress and cadence clearly. PMBOK 8 treats time as something to manage thoughtfully, not a weapon that's used to force progress before it's ready to happen. This domain is where time stops being abstract. Defining activities is about clarity. You identify the actual work required to turn intent into deliverables. Not vague effort, real actions. Sequencing activities creates logic. What has to happen first? What can happen in parallel? Where dependencies will slow you down if you ignore them. Estimating durations isn't about precision. It's about realism. You forecast time with uncertainty in mind and not wishful thinking. Developing the schedule pulls it all together. Timing, cadence, expectations. Shared understanding of how progress should feel over time. Controlling the schedule keeps you in reality. You track progress so delays surface early while there's still time to adjust. And optimizing flow is where modern thinking shows up. You reduce bottlenecks. You smooth handoffs. You protect momentum so value moves instead of piling up. PMBOK 8 treats time as something to be shaped, not something to chase after once it's already gone. All of it serves one purpose: Managing time so value keeps moving, not just so deadlines look good on paper. The finance performance domain is where projects stop being ideas and start being investments. This domain isn't about spreadsheets, it's about stewardship. Cost tells you what the work consumes. Funding determines what's actually possible. Benefits explain why the investment exists in the first place. Investment thinking changes the conversation. You're not just spending money. You're deciding whether the return justifies the effort. And life cycle cost keeps you honest. What it takes to build something is rarely the full story. What it takes to operate it, support it, and sustain it often matters much more. The processes here exist to keep the clarity intact. You estimate costs to understand the commitment you're making. You manage budgets to stay aligned with reality as it changes. And you monitor financial performance to determine whether the investment is still paying off. This is where the guide supports the domain. It provides investment and cost models, methods for budgeting and financial control, cost and funding models that fit different contexts, financial performance methods that track value over time, and artifacts that support real financial decision-making. PMBOK 8 treats money as a signal. When the numbers stop making sense, it's not a finance problem, it's a decision problem. This domain exists to keep projects grounded in reality by ensuring financial stewardship and investment viability. Estimating costs is about understanding the commitment you're asking the organization to make. Not just money, but resources, time, and attention. Determining the budget turns that estimate into a boundary. It's the point where intent becomes an authorized investment. Managing funding keeps the project alive. Funds are secured and released in a way that matches progress and not hope. Controlling costs isn't about restriction. It's about visibility, seeing variances early while decisions still matter. Evaluating financial performance is where honesty shows up. Is the return real? Are the benefits materializing? Or is the value still theoretical? And supporting investment decisions is the most overlooked part. This is where you inform whether the work should continue, pivot, or stop. Ending a project at the right time is often the most responsible decision. PMBOK 8 treats finance as stewardship. If the investment no longer makes sense, the process exists to help you say so clearly and responsibly. The stakeholder performance domain exists because projects don't fail in silence. They fail when alignment erodes. Influence matters, whether it's formal or not. The person who can block progress doesn't always have the title. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it show up later as resistance. Engagement is about presence and not volume. It's about knowing who needs to be involved, when they need to be involved, and how deeply. Too little engagement creates surprises. Too much engagement creates noise. And communication isn't about updates. It's about meaning. What changed, why it matters, and what it means to them. The processes here exist to protect trust. You identify stakeholders so no one critical stays invisible. You plan engagement so involvement is intentional and not reactive. And you manage expectations so delivery doesn't come as a shock. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers influence and communication models, methods for engagement and feedback, stakeholder analysis models to surface power and interest, and artifacts that track expectations and relationships over time. PMBOK 8 treats stakeholder work as continuous. Trust isn't built at kickoff. It's maintained decision by decision. This domain exists because no amount of execution can compensate for loss of trust. The purpose here isn't just communication, it's alignment, shared understanding, and the kind of trust that survives change, pressure, and bad news. Identifying stakeholders is about visibility. Who is impacted? Who has influence? Who can quietly block progress if ignored? Analyzing stakeholder needs goes deeper. It's not just what they want, it's what they care about, how much power they hold, and what success actually means to them. Planning stakeholder engagement makes involvement intentional. Who needs to be closely involved? Who needs regular context? Who only needs outcomes? This is where overcommunication and undercommunication both get corrected. Managing stakeholder engagement is where relationships are built. Concerns are surfaced early. Expectations are recalibrated before they turn into resistance. And monitoring stakeholder relationships keeps alignment alive. As the project changes, people's needs change with it. Engagement has to adapt or trust erodes. PMBOK 8 treats stakeholders as active participants and not an audience. When trust is maintained, problems get discussed early. When it isn't, they show up late when options are limited. The resources performance domain exists for one simple reason. Projects don't deliver value, people do. Teams aren't just a collection of roles, they're relationships. And trust, clarity, and understanding determines how much capability is actually going to show up. Leadership here isn't positional, it's situational. Knowing when to direct, when to support, and when to get out of the way. Capability is more than skill. It's whether the environment allows people to use what they know. Burned out teams don't perform better with better plans. The processes support that reality. You acquire resources so the work is possible at all. You develop teams so that performance improves instead of plateaus. And you manage performance so issues surface early before frustration turns into disengagement. This is where the guide supports the domain. It provides team and leadership models, capability and capacity methods, organizational and team models that reflect real structures, resource planning and development methods, and artifacts that support staffing, growth, and performance. PMBOK 8 treats resource management as human work. If the people aren't supported, nothing else holds together. This domain exists to make sure effort turns into performance. The purpose isn't just staffing. It's creating the conditions where people and assets can actually do their best work. Planning resource management is about foresight, what skills are needed, when they're needed, and where gaps will create risk if ignored. Acquiring resources turns plans into reality. Securing the right people, tools, facilities, and materials so progress doesn't stall waiting for access. Developing the team is where capability compounds, skills grow, trust forms, collaboration replaces friction. Managing team performance keeps energy focused in the right direction. Accountability stays clear. Motivation is maintained. Conflict is addressed before it hardens into disengagement. And optimizing resource utilization is about balance. Workload that's too heavy burns people out. Too light and momentum disappears. Capability only matters if it's usable. PMBOK 8 treats resources as more than inputs. When people are supported and aligned, performance becomes sustainable and not accidental. The risk performance domain exists because uncertainty is unavoidable. Risk isn't just what could go wrong. It's also what could go right if you're paying attention. Threats are the obvious part, but opportunities are the ones that disappear if nobody's watching. Risk appetite matters here. Not what's written in policy, but what the organization actually tolerates when decisions get uncomfortable. And resilience is what shows up when things don't go according to plan. Not panic, not blame, the ability to absorb impact and keep moving. The processes are intentionally simple. You identify risks so surprises have names. You analyze risks so attention goes where it matters the most. And you respond and monitor so uncertainty stays visible instead of turning into crisis. This is where the guide supports the domain. It offers risk and uncertainty models, methods for analysis and response, threat and opportunity models that balance caution with upside, and artifacts that track and communicate risk clearly. PMBOK 8 doesn't promise safety. It helps you stay deliberate when certainty disappears. This domain exists because uncertainty doesn't wait for permission. The purpose isn't to eliminate risk. It's to stay ahead of it on purpose. Identifying risks is about awareness. You name the sources of uncertainty so surprises don't stay invisible. Analyzing risk brings focus. You assess likelihood and impact so attention goes where it actually matters, and not where anxiety is the loudest. Planning risk responses turns concern into action. You decide how to reduce threats and take advantage of opportunities that others might miss. Implementing risk responses is where intent becomes real. Mitigation isn't helpful if it stays theoretical. Opportunities don't create value if no one acts on them. And monitoring risk keeps uncertainty visible over time. Some risks fade and new ones emerge. Staying alert is how resilience is built. PMBOK 8 treats risk as a leadership responsibility. You're not rewarded for avoiding uncertainty. You're trusted to navigate it deliberately. This is the through line the guide keeps reinforcing. The performance domains tell you where your attention needs to be. They don't tell you exactly what to do. That's where the guide comes in. It shows you ways the domains may be supported, models you could use, methods you might apply, artifacts that can help decisions land. Nothing here is required and nothing maps one-to-one. One artifact can support multiple domains. One domain can be supported in many different ways. That's intentional. It aligns with what the standard has been saying all along. Judgment matters more than compliance. Tailoring matters more than uniformity. And value matters more than visible activity. The guide doesn't replace thinking. It supports it when you use it on purpose.